Throughout history, invention has been a driving force behind human progress, marking the transition from one era to another. Great inventors have emerged as the torchbearers of innovation, each contributing uniquely to the tapestry of human achievement. From the flickering candlelight of the past to the brilliance of electric illumination, inventors have transformed everyday life. Figures like Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, and Cyrus McCormick. The stories of these inventors are not just tales of individual brilliance, they reflect a broader cultural and technological evolution. Each invention came through a combination of curiosity, perseverance, and an unwavering belief in the potential for change. Meet Charlie Cley, a teenage genius who seemed destined to one day join the ranks of great inventors. He was born in 1885. As a teenager, he gained attention for his remarkable skills in engineering, which set him apart from his peers. It was 1902, and Charlie, a boy of just 17, already had a patent pending in Washington, D.C. for a new type of air brake. But there had been some kinks that he wanted to work out. And as summer evaporated into fall, Charlie's incessant work had driven him to the brink of mental and physical exhaustion. Adding to his frustration was the fact that it was difficult to find peace and quiet inside the tiny Cawley home which Charlie shared with his mother, Hannah, and several siblings. Hannah had a total of 14 children, 10 of whom were listed as alive on the 1900 U.S. federal census. It seemed to Charlie that from dawn until dusk there was never a moment of peace inside the crowded Cawley home. At the age of 20, brother James was the oldest, while baby Joseph, at 15 months, was the youngest. The other Cawley children fell somewhere in the middle, filling the air with all the sounds of youth, squeals of toddlers, the petty bickering of teenagers, the wailing of a baby, and the exuberant roughhousing of 6-year-olds. It was enough to make a shy, introvert like Charlie lose his mind. How could he ever focus on his mechanical drawings and perfect his inventions with so much activity taking place around him? Nevertheless, it was a happy, healthy family, and Hannah Cawley was proud of all 14 of her children. She was especially proud of Charlie, whose brilliant mind she was counting on to be the family's salvation. Maybe one day one of Charlie's inventions would revolutionize the world and catapult the Cawleys out of poverty and out of the cramped quarters they managed to share without tearing each other apart. Her husband had met his death by drowning in the Monongahela at Redmond's Mill just 1 year earlier, and life for the Cawleys had been a bittersweet struggle ever since. But Hannah held on to hope. On October 9th, Charlie made a maddening discovery. His papers and drawings had been stolen. A few weeks earlier, an unidentified Italian had approached the young inventor and ordered him to stop working on his patent, or else he would see to it that Charlie was killed. The boy thought nothing of the man's threat at the time, but he was inconsolable after discovering his papers were missing, having taken so many weeks and months of meticulous, nerve-wracking work. At around 10 o'clock on the evening of October 9th, the Cawley family inside their 6-room house at 414 2nd Avenue, presently the site of the waterfront, was preparing for bed. Mrs. Hannah Cawley and her 12-year-old daughter Belle curled up together in one bed, while Joseph, Agnes, and the 6-year-old twins, Adelaide and Raymond, clambered into another. Charlie, James, and Harold, the 3 oldest children, occupied a room adjacent to their mother's room. It was around 3 a.m., October 10th, when Charlie arose and got dressed, careful not to awaken his brothers. He did not put on his shoes. He tiptoed down to the cellar, grabbed an axe, and tiptoed back upstairs and entered his mother's room. There was a small kerosene lamp turned down low on the table next to Mrs. Cawley's bed, washing Hannah and Belle with a warm yellow glow. Charlie stared at his mother and sister for a moment, watching their chests rise and fall in rhythm with their deep, peaceful breaths. Mrs. Cawley's skull was crushed with the first blow of the axe. She never knew what happened, and in some strange, grim way it was for the best. It was a mercy killing. Hannah would be spared the horror of witnessing the maniacal rampage that was to follow. The thing about murder is that the hardest part is getting started. The hard part is taking that first stab of the knife, the first pull of the trigger, or, in Charlie's case, the first swing of the axe. But any murderer will tell you that the second blow comes easier than the first, and the third comes easier than the second. Nobody was sure how many blows from the dull edge of the axe were delivered to Mrs. Cawley, but it was said that Charlie had beaten his mother's head to a jelly. Isabel, or Belle, as she was known to the rest of the family, had slept right through the murder of her mother. Charlie swung his weapon at Belle but missed, causing her to wake up. But before her young eyes could register what had happened, it was too late. The next blow killed her, but the blows kept coming. 10, 15, 20, 30, until the bedsheets and mattress were soaked in blood. Beside the bed stood a crib where 15-month-old Joseph slumbered soundly. Charlie raised the axe high over his head. There was no hesitation, no swing and a miss, no need to deliver more than a single blow. Miraculously, the baby was still alive when Charlie left the room. Next, he went over to the bed where Agnes, Adelaide, and Raymond were sleeping. Maybe Charlie's chopping had tired him out, because the bodies of these children were still recognizable when the coroner came. For whatever reason, he did not bash them to a pulp as he had done with his mother and Belle. Charlie entered the room where Henry and James, oblivious to the carnage in the adjacent bedroom, were sleeping. The creaking of the door caused James to awake. The young man sat up, and in the faint yellow light of the gas lamp, he saw Charlie standing in front of him with an axe clutched tightly in his hand. The weapon was dripping with blood, and Charlie was splattered from head to toe with the gore of his victims. There was a maniacal gleam in the young inventor's eyes. James realized that he had to move swiftly if he wanted to survive. The moment Charlie slammed the door shut behind him, James snuffed out the lamp, plunging the room into complete darkness. Heart racing, he leaped out of bed just as the axe struck down with a deafening thud. Charlie, unaware that his older brother had escaped the confines of the bed, unleashed a torrent of blows upon the mattress, each swing fueled by rage and desperation. The air was thick with tension as the axe met the fabric, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. After a relentless assault, Charlie finally paused, panting heavily, and James caught a low mumble escape his brother's lips, indistinct words, drowned in the haze of fury and confusion. James held his breath, every nerve in his body on high alert, knowing he had to find a way to escape this nightmare before it was too late. Charlie swung open the door, and the warm light from their mother's lamp filled the room again. James saw his chance and quickly lunged for the weapon as Charlie swung the axe at him wildly. The sharp blade barely grazed his arm and got stuck in the bed frame with a thud. This only seemed to make Charlie angrier. He yanked the axe free and charged at James with a fierce look in his eyes. Thinking quickly, James grabbed a chair to use as a shield. He managed to dodge Charlie's next swing and then used all his strength to hit Charlie with the chair. A fierce struggle broke out between the two brothers. James was 3 years older and much bigger than Charlie, who was usually shy and quiet. But in this moment, James was shocked by how strong Charlie was. It was as if Charlie had become someone else, filled with a wild energy. After a tough fight, James finally managed to pin Charlie down, overpowering him. As James dragged his brother out of the room, he was hit by a terrible sight that the darkness had hidden. The light from the lamp showed the shocking scene. Blood splattered on the walls and the lifeless bodies of their mother and siblings lying on the floor. James felt a wave of anger and grief wash over him, struggling to control the urge to hurt Charlie. He knew he had to stay focused and find a way to escape this nightmare. James dragged his brother through the streets of Homestead to the police station and turned him over to Officer Rosser. Charlie was placed in a cell. Rosser then returned with James to the Cawley house. 4 of the victims were still alive at this time, and Harry, the only one of Mrs. Cawley's children home at the time who had avoided the slaughter, had already summoned Dr. Barton to the scene. The doctor made a grim pronouncement. They would be dead before sunrise. Another sibling, Mary, was spared from the attack because she was staying at the house of a friend. It was reported that Dr. Barton removed 2 cups worth of crushed bone from the skulls of the victims. They were taken by train to the Southside Hospital to die. Meanwhile, Police Chief Wes Noble had placed 2 officers on guard duty to keep away the curiosity seekers, but they had their hands full. Crowds flocked to the crime scene on 2nd Avenue, and relic hunters desperately attempted to carry away a souvenir of the bloody crime. The crowds grew even larger the following day, with hundreds of visitors taking out pocket knives and trying to cut away slivers of the porch and siding. Others made off with chunks of the fence. On Saturday morning, October 11th, funeral services were held for Hannah Cawley and Belle at St. Mary Magdalene Church. They were interred at the church cemetery. Later that afternoon, the bodies of Annie and Raymond would be buried alongside them. Agnes and Adelaide were still clinging to life at the hospital, as was the baby, Joseph. Of these children, Agnes would be the only one to ever regain consciousness. On November 4th, Agnes had recovered sufficiently enough to leave the hospital, though she possessed no recollection of what had happened. Warden Edward Lewis was perplexed. For days he had been observing the teenage axe murderer, looking for the slightest signs of guilt or remorse. But the boy in the cell remained calm. Not only that, he actually seemed to become more at ease with each passing day. When asked about the crime, Charlie told the warden that he had no recollection of it. Detective P.J. Murphy also talked to Charlie, but could discover no signs of insanity. He appeared content, healthy, and rational. He was eating well and sleeping without the slightest disturbance. The boy surmised that a burglar must have entered the house and slaughtered the family while they were sleeping. Things took a strange turn on Thursday, October 16th, after a man from Ohio came forward and identified the hero of the tragedy, James Cawley, as one of 3 men who had beaten and robbed him on the night of October 4th. When the magistrate asked James if he was guilty of the charge, the young man nodded. Unlike his younger brother, however, James wept heavily when he was placed in jail. This new development sparked a thunderstorm of rumors around Homestead. Did James play a role in assisting his brother in the savage slaughter of their mother and siblings? James had admitted to stealing a small sum of money from a man from Ohio after beating him, and Charlie clung to his belief that the killings had been carried out by a burglar. Was it possible that James Cawley, who had wrestled the bloody axe out of his brother's hands before dragging him to the police station, had set up Charlie to take the fall? While thousands of men and women from the Pittsburgh area contemplated this issue, Adelaide Cawley passed away quietly, making her the 5th victim of the Homestead axe murderer. Even experts were divided when it came to sorting through the mess. 2 doctors, one of medicine and one of theology, interviewed Charlie and James in jail. Neither could agree on the identity of the real killer. The physician insisted that it was Charlie, while the theologian declared that it had to have been James. But all arguments ceased a week later when Charlie finally admitted to committing the murders. There is a curious footnote attached to this part of the story. The same day Charlie confessed, a letter arrived at the Cawley house. It was from the U.S. Patent Office in Washington. His air brake had been accepted, and all Charlie had to do to earn his patent was to pay a fee of $20. This, of course, was now an impossibility. He was eventually awarded a patent for his invention in November of 1902. The defense team for the accused killer exhibited a marked lack of confidence in their plea of insanity. Charlie, known for his composed demeanor, was described as a model inmate during his time at the county jail, where he awaited trial. Observers noted that he exhibited no signs of remorse for his actions, nor did he display any indications of mental illness. The warden reported that Charlie dedicated his time to reading a variety of books, immersing himself in literature as a way to pass the time. His attorney later put forth the controversial argument that Charles Cawley was a somnambulist, claiming he had committed the horrific act of murdering his family while sleepwalking. This defense sought to persuade the court that Charlie should be spared the death penalty due to his alleged lack of awareness during the crime. However, during his confinement, Charlie developed tuberculosis, a severe illness that led his relatives to petition the court for his release into their custody, allowing him to spend his final days at home. The legal strategy proved successful. Charles Cawley was acquitted of all charges against him. Following his release, he moved in with his grandfather, Michael Cawley, along with his aunt, Mary McHugh, and his sister, Mamie, who all hoped to provide a semblance of normalcy in his remaining time. However, fate would not be kind to the young man who had committed such a heinous act. On Monday, February 20th, 1905, Charles Cawley succumbed to consumption at his grandfather's residence on River Road, situated between Beck's Run and 6 Mile Ferry. In an effort to avoid public scrutiny and the media frenzy that might accompany his passing, his relatives arranged a discreet funeral. Despite their wishes, it was later disclosed that Charlie was cremated and his ashes were interred in the family plot at St. Mary Magdalene Cemetery, a final resting place that would forever bear the weight of his tragic story.